5 years. 60 payments. Every brick of that little wooden house was paid for with my sweat and tears. And I lost it all because of a single voicemail I should never have heard. I was in Tokyo, Japan, in a penthouse conference room overlooking the vast, hazy spread of the city, about to sign a 9-figure deal. The kind of deal that shifts markets and rattles boardrooms. My name is Elizabeth Thorne Liz, to the people who matter, and at 32 I was the CEO of Ascendant Global, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition firm. But the second my phone chimed, alerting me to a forwarded message from the security system at my old cottage, none of my professional achievements mattered. I had spent the last decade building something my parents and my brother never believed in. I was here secretly orchestrating the biggest corporate takeover of my career, a takeover specifically targeting their company. I'm about to make them pay for every dismissive comment and every casual act of betrayal, and they have no idea I've bought the very thing they fear losing the most. That knowledge, that profound secret, is more satisfying than any profit margin. I excused myself from the meeting with a sudden sharp jerk. Mr. Tanaka, my Japanese partner, gave me a look of restrained concern which I ignored. I practically ran to the hallway of that 60-story high-rise, the gleaming glass and steel, suddenly feeling cold and mocking, and pressed the phone to my ear. It was a recording of a conversation happening right in the living room of my old house in Connecticut. The voice that cut through first belonged to my brother James the Golden Boy, the CFO of Thorne Innovations, the pride and joy of my parents. His voice was loud, thick, with a self-satisfied arrogance I hadn't missed one bit. Almost $500,000, we made a killing on that old wooden house. James laughed a harsh, crow-like sound. We needed the liquidity, and thank God Liz is too busy playing with her little consulting business in Asia to notice. She'll never know the difference. My heart didn't just sink. It dropped straight through the floor. The house. It wasn't just a house. It was the only piece of property in this world that was truly mine, the one place I went to escape the suffocating presence of my toxic family. It was small, charming, and secluded by the Delaware River, my safe haven. I had spent 5 years pouring every cent of extra income into the mortgage and the upkeep. I called my mother, Eleanor Thorne, immediately. "Oh, Elizabeth, did you get the email?" Her voice was sickly sweet, a symphony of feigned concern that I recognized as the prelude to a sharp confrontation. "Mom." That was my house. I managed to keep my voice steady, though my hands were shaking so badly the phone almost slipped. "I've been paying the mortgage for 5 years. You insisted on keeping the deed in your name just until you were more established." "Don't be dramatic, Elizabeth." She dismissed my concern with the familiar practiced disapproval. "Your father and I needed the money for the company. Thorne Innovations isn't doing as well as we'd hoped. We had to cover some emergency family debt incurred by James to get that new product off the ground." I pressed my back against the cold glass wall of the high-rise. Emergency debt. By selling my home, the one I paid for. "You're never even there," she rationalized, the anger in her voice starting to surface. "Always flying around the world with your little consulting business. James is here working hard for the family business. He needed the capital injection more than you needed a dusty old cottage. Little consulting business." The phrase was a deliberate sting. They had always excluded me, always favored James, always made me feel like an embarrassing footnote to their legacy. They had refused to help with my college tuition, claiming every last cent was an investment in the company. They had even borrowed from my childhood savings account once without asking for the company. The constant favoritism led to this final casual act of theft. "Where exactly am I supposed to live when I return?" I asked, forcing the words out. "You can stay in your old room, darling. The one next to James's empty trophy case," she chirped instantly, reverting to the sweet tone. "It'll be just like when you were in high school. Remember how nice that was?" Nice wasn't the word I would use. I remembered the constant criticism, the comparisons, and the pressure. I remembered the relentless manipulation to make me feel small. "I have to go, Mom. I'm in the middle of something important. I hung up before she could respond, letting the phone drop heavily into my pocket. Back in the conference room, I forced myself to sit down, looking at the immense contracts spread before me. The irony of the situation hit me with the force of a physical blow. While my parents were stealing my house to save their failing tech company, I was here in Tokyo secretly orchestrating the biggest corporate takeover of my career, a takeover specifically targeting Thorn Innovations. My parents thought I was running a handful of laptops and a glorified website. In reality, I was the head of Ascendant Global, a multi-billion-dollar acquisition firm specializing in turning around failing companies. For the past 18 months, through a maze of shell companies and strategic debt purchases, a complex financial maneuver I'd even nicknamed Operation SEO, I had been systematically acquiring their outstanding loans and positioning myself to gain controlling interest. My phone buzzed again. A text from James. "Mom told you about the house. Sorry, sis, but business is business." That phrase, business is business, their ultimate justification for every callous act of injustice. I typed back a single simple word. Okay. I turned to Mr. Tanaka, my Japanese partner in this massive transaction. The contract before me wasn't just a deal. It was payback. The documents are ready. "Mr. Tanaka," I said, speaking in fluent Japanese, yet another skill my parents never knew I possessed. He bowed slightly, sliding a folder across the table. "Everything is in place, Thorn-san. Thorn Innovations won't know what hit them. The shares are transferring now." I signed the final papers. The ink on the page sealed not just the deal, but my parents' fate. In less than 2 months, I would hold 51% controlling interest in the company they had prioritized over everything, even over my dignity and my home. The knowledge that karma was already in motion felt like the cold, hard steel of a good sword in my hand. "Book me a flight home," I told my assistant, my voice clear and firm. "It's time for the true CEO of Ascendant Global to pay the Thorn family a very long, overdue visit." The frantic weeks that followed my call from Tokyo were a blur of legal maneuvering, financial disclosures, and strategic planning. I didn't go back to the suburbs immediately. Instead, I rented a sleek and personal apartment in Manhattan. I ignored the constant performative calls and texts from my mother Eleanor, who left voicemails dripping with fake concern urging me to come home for Thanksgiving and assuring me the guest room was ready. It was the ultimate act of manipulation. I knew exactly why they wanted me there, to witness my defeat, my sadness over the loss of the house, and to feel justified in their betrayal. They needed to believe their family business was safe and that my small inconvenience was worth it. I agreed to go not as the wounded daughter, but as the executioner on a scouting trip. I arrived at my parents' house in Connecticut late on Thanksgiving dinner afternoon. The air in the foyer, usually thick with the scent of pine and polish, was saturated with forced cheer. The aroma of sage and turkey was almost sickeningly sweet, a cloying mask over the underlying rot of our toxic family atmosphere. My brother James was already holding court in the kitchen, a glass of expensive bourbon in his hand. He looked tense beneath his smug exterior, but flashed me a condescending smile. "Well, look who decided to grace us with her presence," he drawled, not moving from his spot by the imported granite countertop. "I thought you were busy saving the world, Liz." "Just finishing up some contracts, James," I replied, my voice cool and flat. I noted the way his eyes quickly darted to my luggage, as if expecting to see the paltry contents of the life he thought he'd evicted. The dinner was a masterclass in family drama. My father Robert talked endlessly about the turnaround at Thorn Innovations, boasting about the brilliant financial strategies. James had implemented the very strategies that required selling my house. My mother kept trying to draw me into the conversation, asking pointed questions about my little consulting firm and if I was getting enough sleep. Every question was a thinly veiled attempt to assert their continued favoritism toward James and minimize my success. I remained calm, eating slowly and observing everything. I was gathering data, not participating in a family meal. I excused myself early, citing jet lag, and retreated to my childhood room, the cramped, impersonal space at the end of the hall. The air in the room was stale, still smelling faintly of the dusty textbooks and teenage dreams I'd abandoned decades ago. I sat on the edge of the twin bed, but I wasn't there to rest. I was there to listen. About 30 minutes later, I heard their footsteps below. My father's heavy tread followed by James's restless pacing. The sounds drifted up through the heating vents, clear as a microphone. They had moved the conversation to the study directly below my room, a space they assumed was utterly private. "It was a temporary fix, Dad. You know that—" James's voice was sharp, laced with genuine panic now that the performative dinner was over. "The money from the house bought us another 3 weeks. But the creditors are circling. The latest acquisition target. It's critical." "Critical? You call that disaster critical, James?" My father's voice, usually a booming authority, was a low, desperate growl. "You promised me that the last stock maneuver would stabilize us. You took out a private loan using our minority shares as collateral. Do you know what kind of betrayal that is? If that falls through, the whole company is exposed." James's response was a long, ragged exhale. "I had to. I was trying to save your legacy, Dad. The whole thing started going downhill a year ago when we invested in that defunct R&D project. I needed cash fast. Selling Liz's house was the only way to cover the short-term debt and keep the loan officers quiet." I sat in the darkness, the truth washing over me like ice water. My heart plummeted, a familiar ache returning with a sharp physical jolt. The house, my sanctuary. I pictured the sagging floorboards and the scent of rain on old wood, every detail a reminder of what I had lost. It wasn't just my parents being dismissive. James was a sinking ship, and they had tossed my life raft the house to keep him afloat. The level of manipulation was breathtaking. They weren't just saving the company. They were concealing James's catastrophic failure and his illegal financial strategies. They had gambled my future to cover his past. I listened for another hour as they dissected the company's precarious finances. They talked about the one massive anonymous firm that had been buying up their long-term family debt. For the last year, a firm they feared was positioning for a hostile takeover. I smiled in the darkness. They were talking about Ascendant Global. They were talking about me. The confession I overheard solidified my purpose. This wasn't just revenge. It was necessary surgery to stop the bleeding of their reckless actions. Quietly, I crept out of the room, down the back staircase, and slipped out the side door into the cold November night. Adrenaline overrode my exhaustion as I drove straight to my apartment. I called Mr. Tanaka in Tokyo, waking him up at 6 in the morning. "Tanaka-san, I want to move on the target acquisition now." I stated my voice low but firm. "Buy up the remaining 10% of the shares required for the controlling interest. Don't wait 2 months. I want to finalize the corporate takeover by the end of the week." He didn't ask questions. He knew the tone of absolute certainty. "It will be done, Thorne-san. The financial documents are ready for your signature." I hung up and looked out the window at the distant, glittering skyline. They had used me to cover up a lie. Now I would use their lies to take everything. I knew my decision would bring this family drama to a crashing, catastrophic end. But they had forced my hand. I was leaving behind the wounded daughter and stepping fully into the woman who demanded justice. Karma was coming for the Thorne family, and I was going to be the one to orchestrate the moment the tables turned. The following Monday, I found myself walking into the pristine, intimidating offices of the Century Legal Group in Midtown. This wasn't where the confrontation would happen, but it was the staging ground. I was meeting with their lead partner, a tough, stone-faced lawyer named Rebecca. I sat in her office presenting the culmination of 18 months of work, the complete financial and debt profile of Thorne Innovations. "He thinks he's a clever CFO playing a game of chicken with creditors," I explained, placing the thick binder on her massive mahogany desk. "The reality is, he's just been signing over IOUs to my shell companies." Rebecca adjusted her reading glasses, a slow smile spreading across her face as she flipped through the documents. "Ms. Thorne, this isn't just a hostile corporate takeover. This is a surgical operation. You didn't just buy the family debt. You bought the debt from the people he thought were his partners. He's been dancing to your tune for months." I need to be at the emergency board meeting this afternoon, I told her. My father Robert and James believe they are meeting with an anonymous foreign investor to sell a minority stake just enough to stave off the immediate bankruptcy. And you're going to crash the party, Rebecca finished for me, her eyes gleaming with professional admiration. I'm going to introduce them to the real majority shareholder. I stood up, adjusting the lapels of my tailored Italian suit. It's time for James to realize his brilliant financial strategy was just a very expensive, very public act of self-sabotage. At 3 o'clock sharp, I entered the glass-walled conference room at Thorn Innovations headquarters. The air was thick with desperation, masked by a veneer of corporate professionalism. Robert, my father, was pacing nervously. James was seated at the head of the table, trying to project a sense of control. His tie loosened a sheen of sweat on his forehead. Elizabeth, what are you doing here? Robert snapped, his face instantly darkening with annoyance. This is a private, high-level family business meeting. This is not the time for your personal house drama. Actually, Dad, I replied, my voice calm. This meeting just became very public and very relevant to me. I nodded to Mr. Tanaka, who entered behind me, followed by Rebecca carrying a large, ominous leather briefcase. James, still clueless, sneered. Did you bring your lawyer, Liz? Did you think you could scare us into giving you back a down payment? That wooden house is gone, sis. Accept injustice. I smiled, a slow, predatory expression that didn't reach my eyes. The house is gone, James. But you're right, it's about ownership. You think you're selling a minority stake to solve your problems, but the hidden truth is you no longer have a controlling interest to sell. The room went completely silent. Robert stared at me, his jaw slack. I am here on behalf of Ascendant Global, I announced, placing a signed financial statement on the table. And as of this morning, Ascendant Global owns 51% of Thorn Innovations' outstanding shares. We are the majority shareholder. James leaped to his feet, knocking his chair backward. That's impossible. Ascendant Global is a massive acquisition firm. They wouldn't touch a mid-tier company like ours. You run a consulting firm. Stop the manipulation, Liz. Ascendant Global does specialize in turning around failing tech companies, I conceded, leaning over the table toward James. And who do you think is the CEO of Ascendant Global, James? You met her in Tokyo a few weeks ago. I watched the realization spread across his face, the shock, the denial, the dawning horror. It was priceless. My father gripped the table, his knuckles white. Can't be what James, I pressed, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Successful a CEO. Too much of a disappointment to build something bigger than your little family business. The irony is, the company you prioritized over me is now mine. Rebecca stepped forward, placing a thick stack of contracts on the table. Mr. Thorne Jr., as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, all corporate liabilities are being absorbed by Ascendant Global. We will be holding a board meeting tomorrow morning to finalize the restructuring. I advise you to clear your offices by the close of business today. James stumbled back, collapsing into his chair. You can't do this to us. We're your family, he pleaded, the arrogance finally gone, replaced by naked fear. Business is business, James. I quoted their favorite phrase back to them, watching as their faces crumbled. Isn't that what you always said? You have one day to pack your things. Karma has come full circle. The heavy oak door of the conference room clicked shut behind me, sealing Robert, James, and Eleanor into their freshly built prison of consequences. I didn't wait around for the shouting, the tears, or the eventual acceptance. That was their family drama to navigate alone. I took the express elevator down, feeling the sudden intoxicating lightness of genuine freedom. But the relief was short-lived. I was only in the parking garage when my phone began to vibrate violently. It wasn't James, not yet. It was my mother, Eleanor. Elizabeth, how could you? Her voice tore through the speaker, ragged with hysteria and disbelief. Your father is having a crisis. This is an attack. You've ruined the family business. You've taken everything. I took what belonged to me, Mom. I stated, my tone firm as I climbed into the back of my waiting town car. And James signed the papers. He was so busy manipulating the company's debt, he forgot to check who was holding the note. I suggest you focus on packing his things before the security change at 8 in the morning. I hung up before she could start her usual cycle of pleading and accusation. I spent the evening meticulously reviewing the transition strategy with Mr. Tanaka over a secure video line, treating the Thorne family as just another acquisition target, cold calculated and devoid of emotion. But the calm shattered just after midnight. My phone rang again. This time it was James. I considered letting it ring, but I knew this confrontation was necessary. I needed to hear the confession, not for him, but for my own sense of finality. Lizzie, please." His voice was broken, stripped of the CFO arrogance. It was the frantic, terrified voice of the little brother who used to cry when he couldn't solve a math problem. "You can't do this. You've exposed everything, you've destroyed the only thing Dad and Mom ever cared about." "And what did you destroy, James?" I asked, my voice chillingly calm in the dark apartment. "You destroyed my dignity." He paused, a choked sound coming through the line. I know I messed up. But I was trying to save us. I went to that anonymous firm, the one you control, with a desperate deal. I sold them the collateral to cover my initial family debt. I thought I was buying us 6 months. The hidden truth finally spilled out. I hadn't just bought the debt. James had approached my shell company's subsidiary, begging them to take on the most toxic assets. He thought he was brilliant. He was a puppet on a string I'd been pulling for 18 months. "You weren't saving us, James." I countered, the karma in my voice palpable. "You were confirming my analysis. You proved you would sacrifice anyone, even your sister, to avoid facing your failure. And the anonymous firm you dealt with, they knew exactly what they were buying." He started to sob, a heavy, agonizing sound. "It's not just the family business, Liz. They're saying I'm personally liable for that private loan collateral. They're coming after my car, my accounts, everything. They won't even let me back into the office." "That sounds like a problem, James," I said, repeating a dismissive phrase he'd used against me years ago when I needed help with a business loan. "You engineered this disaster. I merely executed a clean corporate takeover according to the terms you helped establish. The injustice you inflicted is now reflected back on your balance sheet." I knew this was the moment of absolute confrontation. He had lost his control, his facade, and his wealth. He had nothing left to use against me. "You have no heart, Elizabeth," he whispered, a final despairing accusation. "You're just doing this for revenge." "No, James. I did this for self-respect," I corrected, closing my eyes. "I am no longer the little sister you could dismiss and exploit. I am your boss. And as your boss, I advise you to read the documents Rebecca left. You are personally liable for the funds illegally moved from the company's reserve accounts, which, by the way, were intended for my inheritance." The line went dead with a high-pitched click. I had given him the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. I had stripped him of every last layer of manipulation and forced him to face the mirror. The tables turned completely. I walked to my window, looking out over Manhattan. My throat was tight, but the hollow space in my chest had finally filled. I had endured the toxic family dynamic, but the woman who hung up that phone call was reborn. She was ready for the next phase of the acquisition, the phase where she rebuilt what they had nearly destroyed. The next morning, I stood in my hotel suite, adjusting the lapels of a navy blue power suit, a suit specifically chosen for its surgical precision. I was meeting them again, this time as their superior. The woman staring back in the mirror was no longer the daughter they had excluded. She was the CEO of Ascendant Global. My goal was simple: to assert absolute control and reclaim my dignity in the very room where they had always dismissed me. I arrived at Thorne Innovations headquarters exactly at 8:55 in the morning. The security guard, now an employee of my firm, nodded respectfully as I swept past. The express elevator ride to the executive floor felt different. It no longer carried the weight of my past resentment, but the lightness of my future authority. When the doors opened, I saw them. Robert, Eleanor, and James were huddled by the coffee station, their faces a mixture of fear, shock, and stubborn disbelief. They looked like a dethroned royal family attempting to stage a pathetic last stand. I walked straight into the boardroom, the sound of my heels echoing off the polished stone floor. I bypassed the seat I had always been assigned, the small, uncomfortable chair near the window, and walked directly to the head of the table, the chair's position. "Good morning," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I placed my briefcase containing the final restructuring documents directly in front of me. The board meeting for Ascendant Global and Thorn Innovations is called to order at 9 o'clock sharp. Robert, my father, was the first to react, his face turning beet red. "Elizabeth, this is a farce. You cannot possibly believe this corporate takeover is legal. The board will never ratify this injustice." "The board, Dad, is already on my side," I corrected him calmly, pulling out the signed papers from our external members. "They understand that your legacy was sinking the company. I, as the majority shareholder, am here to save the employees and the remaining assets." Eleanor attempted her usual manipulation, her voice shaking. "Darling, we can talk about this. We're your family. You don't take the family business that your father built over 40 years. We'll give you back the money for the wooden house. We'll double it." "You're right, Mom. We are family," I conceded, meeting her gaze without flinching. "Which is why I have reserved the most painful confrontation for you three." I opened the restructuring document and read the first section. "Effective immediately. Robert Thorne is relieved of all executive duties, including CEO. His title is reduced to non-executive advisor with no voting power. Eleanor Thorne's role as Vice President of Public Relations is terminated. Your services are no longer required." My mother gasped, sinking into her chair, clutching her chest. Robert stood up, his face contorted with pure contempt. "You ungrateful brat! After everything we gave you, you have no honor." "Honor?" I challenged, my voice rising slightly. The years of buried resentment finally surfacing. "You sold my home and stole my inheritance to cover James's disastrous losses. You taught me that honor means nothing and business is business. I've simply applied your philosophy to your assets." Then I turned to James. He was pale, watching the dismantling of his life's work with wide, panicked eyes. "James," I continued, closing the book, "I am not firing you. I am offering you exactly what you offered me, a chance to work your way up from the very bottom. You are hereby offered an entry-level position in the accounting department. Your only duties will be reconciliation reporting directly to the new CFO. You will start Monday at 7 in the morning." The humiliation was complete. James, the Golden Boy CFO, reduced to an entry-level clerk who would have to take orders from the woman he deemed unworthy. He was speechless, utterly broken. "You are stepping down," I instructed, my tone brooking no argument. "You have 30 minutes to clear your personal belongings. James, you have until the end of the day. Security will escort you out." Robert tried to lunge for the papers, his hands shaking violently. He knocked a glass of water to the floor where it shattered, and a small puddle spread across the polished wood. "You cannot do this to me. I built this company." I stood towering over him, asserting my physical and corporate power. "You built it, Dad. I now own it. The tables turned the moment you prioritized your arrogance over my self-respect." I looked at James one last time. He slumped his tie, now hanging crooked, the sheen of sweat on his forehead more pronounced. "You all taught me the cost of loyalty. Now you know the cost of betrayal." I signaled for the new head of security, an enormous man named Marcus, to enter the room. He gently guided Robert and Eleanor toward the door, their protests fading into pathetic mumbles. James simply sat, staring blankly at the newly empty chair where his father once sat. As the door clicked shut behind the former executives, the room was finally silent. I sat down in the chair's position, breathing in the new air of authority. This was not about revenge. It was about the restoration of dignity. My phone buzzed. It was Rebecca. "Liz, excellent work. But there's a problem." Her voice was low and urgent. "I found a late-stage inheritance document. It turns out the wooden house wasn't just my dad's property. It was designated as collateral for a private trust fund established in your name. Selling it was not just a breach of fiduciary duty, it was potentially fraudulent. This opens up a new front against James, one that hits him personally, not corporately." I leaned back in the large leather chair looking out at the city skyline, the CEO of a now viable company. Good, I whispered. It's time for James to realize the depth of the hidden truth he tried to bury. The day felt impossibly long, the adrenaline of the boardroom confrontation giving way to the cold, necessary work of an acquisition. I had inherited my father's corner office, a cavernous space overlooking the city, but the heavy mahogany and oppressive drapes felt like relics of the toxic family era. I was sifting through the remaining detritus of Robert's life, old photos, trophies, and dusty binders, when my fingers brushed against something solid, a small dark wooden box tucked behind a row of law books on his shelf. It wasn't locked, but as I pulled it out, a faint scent of old paper and dust filled the air. The lid creaked open with a groan that seemed to echo in the silent office, revealing papers stamped with "Private and Confidential" and the unmistakable heading, "Last Will and Testament of Robert Thorne Sr., and documents relating to the Elizabeth Thorne Irrevocable Trust Fund." My hands, which had been steady through the entire corporate takeover, began to tremble. This was the hidden truth Rebecca had hinted at. The documents revealed that 10 years prior, my father, perhaps battling some subconscious guilt over his blatant favoritism toward James, had established this trust fund to secure my future. The primary asset, the property where my wooden house stood. The fund's terms dictated that the property could never be sold without my explicit written consent. The proceeds were meant to form my non-discretionary inheritance, shielding me from the unstable nature of the family business. A wave of dizzying clarity hit me. My parents hadn't just used the house for liquidity, they had committed fraud. They had deliberately breached the terms of a legal trust fund designed to protect the only asset I legally possessed, and they had done it at James's behest. I didn't need to look far for proof of his betrayal. Tucked into the trust documents was an internal memo dated 3 months prior, signed by my father and countersigned by James, the former CFO. The memo authorized the temporary reallocation of the funds from the house sale. James, as the financial steward, knew exactly where that money was legally supposed to go. Instead, he had diverted it straight into the black hole of Thorne Innovations' family debt. The revelation brought a new kind of cold rage. The anger I had felt before, the quiet professional anger of a CEO executing a hostile takeover, felt superficial now. That anger was a tool. This, however, was visceral. This was beyond retribution. It was restoration. I immediately called Rebecca. "I have the documentation. The memo proves James's full knowledge and participation in the fraudulent sale of the trust asset. The entire sum must be accounted for and returned to the trust fund immediately." Rebecca's voice was sharp with professional urgency. "Liz, this changes everything. We can now pursue this against James personally. This isn't just about his job. This is about his personal liability. We can file a civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty and illegal conversion of assets." "Do it," I instructed. "File the injunction. He took a calculated risk to cover his family debt by hitting my inheritance. Now he loses his personal assets to repay it." Less than an hour later, my personal phone, the one James still had the number for, rang. It was him. "Liz, what is this paperwork? They're freezing my personal accounts, my retirement fund. This is a legal injustice." His voice was a pathetic squeak, the roar of the CFO replaced by the whimper of a thief caught red-handed. "It's not illegal, James," I replied, my voice calm as ice. "It's called restitution. You stole from my trust fund. Read the documents. They outline the next steps. I am reclaiming my inheritance." He started pleading, his voice dissolving into frantic tears. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll work at the company for free. I'll give you the wooden house back. I'll pay you double. Just don't take everything I have left." But then the final agonizing sound came, the sobbing of my mother. Eleanor must have been listening on speakerphone. "Elizabeth, your father can't take this. He's old. James can't afford a lawyer. He has nothing left. We need that money. Please, darling, I'll do anything you ask. Just don't let your brother lose everything." The manipulation had reached its peak. The mother who had ignored me for 30 years was now begging me to spare the golden boy. I knew exactly what I wanted. I looked at the stolen memo signed by the man who had casually dismissed me as unworthy. I closed my eyes and whispered my demand into the phone. "You'll do anything, Mom." "Then listen very carefully. This isn't about the money. This is about making things public. I want a confession. I want a public apology." The phone went silent. The only sound was the ragged breathing of my mother. I had cornered her, and the price of sparing James was her own dignity. I met my mother Eleanor 2 days later at a small, unassuming cafe downtown. I chose the location deliberately far from the expensive country clubs and suburban haunts where her reputation held sway. I wanted her to feel exposed, uncomfortable, and real. She arrived looking utterly defeated. Gone was the sharp-tailored elegance. She wore a tired trench coat and her face was lined with genuine worry, not the performative kind. She looked like a woman who had finally been forced to confront the wreckage of her own choices. She didn't offer a hug or a greeting. She simply slid into the booth across from me, gripping a lukewarm cup of tea. "You won, Elizabeth," she stated, her voice a dry rasp. "You took the family business and you've ruined James. Now what do you want? What is the price to stop the lawyer from destroying what little he has left?" I looked at her, searching for any flicker of the mother I had dreamed of having, the one who would stand up for me. "You still don't get it, do you, Mom?" I asked, my voice calm. "This isn't about James. This is about dignity. For 30 years, you chose to enable favoritism and manipulation to maintain your standing in Dad's toxic structure. You let James steal my inheritance, the only thing I had protected outside of that structure, and now you're still pleading for his survival, not seeking forgiveness for your own betrayal." She broke then. The carefully controlled facade shattered and she began to sob into her hands. "I'm sorry, Liz. I'm sorry for the house. I'm sorry for everything. But he is still my son. Your father is falling apart. If James loses everything, he won't survive. I'll do anything. I'll give you my jewelry, my share of the house." "I don't want your jewelry, Mom," I said, pushing a napkin across the table. "And I don't want your money. You already know the price. I told you on the phone. I want a public apology." She looked up, her eyes red and puffy. "No, not that. Not that confrontation. That would ruin the family name forever. It would be a humiliation for Robert. That is exactly what James ensured when he signed that memo, Mom. You were worried about the injustice of me taking the company, but you stood silently while James committed fraud against his own sister's trust fund. Your toxic family dynamic has earned this fate." I pressed the attack, knowing I had to leverage her emotional breaking point. I laid a folder on the table. "If you refuse to give the public apology, Rebecca will file the documents detailing the hidden truth of James's illegal use of the trust fund assets. That kind of exposure won't just ruin the family name, it will bring corporate fraud charges. It will mean jail time for James and potentially Dad for signing off on it." The word jail hit her like a physical blow. She went completely silent, her face drained of color. "I need you to organize a large event, a retirement party for Dad, a charity function, something where all your old friends and their husbands, the partners, the bankers, everyone who judged me and fawned over James will be present." I leaned in, my voice dangerously low. "At that event, you will stand up and you will read a statement I will write. You will confess to the family drama, the favoritism, and the theft of my inheritance. That is the price for me calling off the civil suit and keeping James out of prison for family debt." Eleanor stared at the folder, then at me. She struggled for air, trapped between her selfish maternal love and the fear of losing everything. "I'll do it." She finally whispered the 2 words carrying the weight of 30 years of silence and complicity. "Tell me what to say." I knew at that moment that this was not revenge. This was the restoration of my own moral universe. I had finally forced the architect of the toxic family to pay the highest price, her own carefully guarded reputation. I had given her a chance to reclaim her dignity, but she would have to earn it through public humiliation. My mother Eleanor surprisingly moved with the efficiency of a true social operator. Within 5 days, she had organized the event. Not a simple retirement party, but an extravagant celebration of Robert Thorne's legacy and the Future of Innovation, held at the prestigious Sterling Country Club, the very epicenter of her social standing. This ensured maximum attendance from every family business associate and socialite who had ever witnessed my humiliation. I arrived exactly 10 minutes late, allowing time for the room to fill with the buzz of anticipation and gossip. I wore a simple, expertly tailored black dress, the uniform of a CEO, and my expression was one of cool, detached professionalism. I was not there as a guest. I was there as the unseen judge. James and Robert were positioned awkwardly by the bar, radiating nervous energy. James, wearing a suit that looked too large for him, now kept glancing at the entrance, his eyes wide with terror. Robert, attempting to maintain his old authority, was red-faced, downing scotch too quickly. Eleanor, however, moved like a sleepwalker, greeting guests with a mechanical smile that never reached her eyes. She wore a diamond necklace that suddenly looked heavy, like a chain of guilt. At 8 o'clock, Eleanor tapped a crystal glass with a fork, calling the room to silence. The lights dimmed and all attention turned to her. "Thank you all for celebrating my husband Robert's long and distinguished career." She began, her voice steady but lacking its usual theatrical flourish. She then paused, took a deep visible breath and pulled a folded sheet of paper, the statement I had written, from her clutch. "But tonight is about more than a career," she continued, her voice gaining strength though trembling slightly. "It is about honesty, and it is about righting a great wrong that I have committed against my daughter Elizabeth." A ripple of shock went through the elegant crowd. This was not the family drama they had come to passively observe. This was an active confrontation. Eleanor began to read, her voice ringing clearly in the sudden silence. She confessed to the decades of favoritism shown to James. She confessed that Thorne Innovations was failing due to James's reckless decisions, not just a market shift. Then came the crux of the public apology. To cover James's mistakes and a critical family debt, she confessed, her eyes meeting mine across the room. "We chose to sell the wooden house belonging to Elizabeth. Worse, we signed legal documents knowingly defrauding Elizabeth's inheritance and trust fund money her father set aside to protect her future. James, with his knowledge as CFO, participated fully in this betrayal." Robert exploded. "Eleanor, stop this insanity," he roared, lunging toward the stage, but the club manager and two large guests intercepted him, forcing him back toward his chair. Eleanor ignored him, her eyes fixed on the paper, the final words trembling. "We justified this injustice with the false belief that Elizabeth's success meant she wouldn't notice or wouldn't fight back. We were wrong. We stole her home, and she reclaimed our company. We deserve this karma." The silence that followed was deafening, the air thick with profound humiliation. Eleanor folded the paper and looked directly at me. I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking deliberately on the polished floor. I took the microphone from my mother's numb hand. "The company has been successfully restructured," I announced, my voice clear and authoritative. "The civil suit against James has been dropped in exchange for this public apology. I wish my family well in their next endeavors." I looked at James, who was staring at the floor, utterly defeated. I looked at Robert, whose face was purple with rage and shame. The tables turned completely. They had lost the one thing they valued more than money, their public reputation and dignity. The public confession had stripped away the last veneer of respectability from the Thorne name. The next morning, Thorne Innovations, now Ascendant Global, was the top story in every regional business section. Yet I felt no peace. The karma had landed, but the family drama was not over. My peace was shattered by a frantic call from Rebecca. "Liz James has filed a lawsuit," she informed me, her voice sharp with annoyance. "He's claiming asset deprivation, malicious use of the corporate takeover, and coercion based on Eleanor's public apology. He believes since you dropped the civil suit over the inheritance, you have no leverage left." I felt a cold, clear laugh rise in my throat. James, in his arrogance, had tried to weaponize his victimhood, claiming injustice while standing in the ruins of his own making. "He's trying to leverage his betrayal for a payoff," I summarized. "Tell his lawyer I accept the confrontation. I want a meeting in 48 hours." I spent the next day working with Rebecca preparing my ultimate counterstrike. In the restructuring files, I had found a secret ledger, a hidden truth that went beyond the trust fund fraud. This ledger detailed James's unauthorized use of company operating capital, a few $100,000, to cover a massive personal stock loss months earlier. This was not just a breach of fiduciary duty. It was corporate embezzlement, a crime punishable by jail. "This is it, Rebecca," I said, sliding the copies of the ledger across the table. "This is the line he crossed from stupid to criminal. If he proceeds with the lawsuit, we file this with the district attorney's office. This ends the civil case instantly and starts a criminal one." The confrontation took place in a neutral, sterile conference room. James arrived with his aggressive, expensive lawyer, Mr. Harrison. James looked smug, convinced he had secured the moral high ground after the public apology. "Ms. Thorne," Mr. Harrison began, his tone condescending, "my client is seeking $3 million in damages for the malicious disruption of his career and the illegal freezing of his personal accounts. Your voluntary dropping of the civil suit shows weakness. Let's discuss terms." "The terms are simple, Mr. Harrison," I replied, ignoring James entirely. I slid a thin envelope across the table. "You withdraw the lawsuit immediately and your client signs a non-disclosure agreement regarding Ascendant Global. Otherwise, I will be signing this." Mr. Harrison picked up the envelope and opened the contents copies of the hidden truth, James's private ledger, detailing the unauthorized transfer of company funds to cover his family debt from a personal investment failure. The lawyer's face went instantly pale. He immediately pulled James into a corner where they began a low, frantic argument. James was sputtering, denying the evidence, while Mr. Harrison pointed repeatedly to the word jail on the cover sheet of the criminal statute summary Rebecca had included. They returned to the table 5 minutes later. James was defeated, his earlier smugness replaced by terror. "My client will withdraw the lawsuit immediately," Mr. Harrison stated, his voice flat with professional disappointment. "Contingent on a signed agreement that Ms. Thorne and Ascendant Global will not pursue criminal charges based on this new information." "Done," I said, signing the withdrawal agreement Rebecca had prepared hours ago. "And James will pay your firm's fees." "Not me. He's still personally liable for his family debt. He just avoids prison." James stared at me, his eyes full of hatred, but he signed the document. He had tried to weaponize the system against me one last time, and his own criminality was the weapon I used to destroy his final defense. The tables turned completely. He walked out of the conference room, a broken man realizing the full extent of the karma. Later that evening, the sense of finality was quiet and complete. The lawsuit was gone. James was neutralized. I sat in my office watching the city lights, knowing I had won my dignity back. Then my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "I know James. I was with him for 2 years. He wasn't just stealing company money. He was skimming funds from an investor's account. I have the bank statements. If you want the real story of his betrayal and his family debt, meet me, Chloe." I stared at the message. A new secret, a new layer of James's hidden truth. The war was won, but the revelations were not over. The text message from Chloe didn't shock me. Nothing James did could surprise me anymore. But the idea that there was another hidden truth, another layer to his betrayal, was professionally intriguing. He wasn't just a corporate thief. He was a master manipulator on a personal level. The public apology was a symbolic victory, but this felt like the final definitive step to dismantle his entire facade. I agreed to meet Chloe the next day at a small anonymous cafe in Greenwich Village, deliberately chosen for its distance from the former Thorne social circle. When I walked in, the cafe's soft jazz and quiet chatter felt miles away from the corporate war I'd been fighting. I arrived early, sitting at a corner table, a cup of untouched coffee in my hands. The sight of Chloe, however, pulled me back. She looked exactly as I imagined, beautiful, but with a brittle, stressed energy. She wasn't one of the polished, moneyed suburban wives. She had the look of someone who worked hard and had been deeply wounded. My own history of betrayal made me feel a quiet, empathetic pang for her. "You're Liz," she stated, her voice tight. "I'm Chloe. I have to do this. He ruined me." He didn't just ruin me, I thought. He made me feel like I had to fight him. "I know he ruined people, Chloe," I replied, pushing a coffee toward her. "Start from the beginning. Why the secret?" She explained they had been in a relationship for 2 years, spanning James's entire tenure as CFO. She believed his stories of being an undervalued executive fighting to save his family business. She described his manipulation, how he convinced her he was planning to leave the toxic family drama behind and start a life with her. He said he needed capital for a bridge investment, a secret deal that would save the company and allow him to walk away a millionaire. Chloe recounted, her eyes filling with tears. "I liquidated my savings, $150,000, and gave it to him. He called it an investment in our future." I felt a dull ache of injustice. He had used my mother, he had used me, and he had used this woman, all while weaving the same narrative of being the victimized hero. "He didn't use that for the bridge investment, did he?" I prompted gently. "No," she confirmed, her voice cracking. "I saw the bank statements, the hidden truth. He used it to cover a missing deposit from an external investor's account. He was skimming money before the corporate takeover even happened, right under your father's nose." She opened her bag and produced a stack of financial documents, faded printouts, and desperate text messages, all the evidence of his personal betrayal and a new layer of family debt. "He lied about everything. He told me the lawsuit was just family drama, a misunderstanding over the wooden house," Chloe said, pushing the pile toward me. "He was planning to vanish with the investor's money and leave me with the debt. I want karma. I want him to pay me back." I looked at the documents, amazed by James's audacity. He had created an elaborate scheme involving embezzlement, family debt repayment, and a fake romantic affair to fuel his desperate lifestyle. "Chloe, I'll help you," I stated. "I don't need your evidence for my case. James is already neutralized and facing personal liability. But this is about justice for you. I will use Ascendant Global's legal resources to get your money back and expose his final betrayal." I immediately arranged for a small, non-public settlement to be drafted, guaranteeing Chloe's money would be returned. The emotional repayment, however, was for me to deliver. I sent James a single email, a final act of confrontation. The subject line was chillingly simple: Chloe's documents. I attached copies of the bank statements showing his fraudulent transfers and the personal notes where he promised to pay her back. "Your family debt wasn't just financial, James," I wrote. "It was moral. You thought you could use the toxic family dynamic as a shield, but you only built a target. Your lies are finished." The phone rang 3 seconds later. It wasn't James. It was Robert. "Elizabeth, what did you send James? He's having a full breakdown. He says you know about the investor money." "Tell me that isn't true, Lizzie. Tell me your brother hasn't crossed a criminal line." "He crossed it a long time ago." "Dad," I answered, my voice devoid of emotion. "He just made sure only I knew the truth. You need to focus on his personal legal defense now, not the family business. That part is over. This is about his freedom." I hung up, feeling a profound sense of closure. The family drama had reached its lowest point, but by exposing James's betrayal to Chloe and the rest of the world, I had finally broken the cycle of silence and manipulation that had defined my life. By the time I left the cafe, the corporate world had been put on notice. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened on the courthouse steps, a venue I chose to ensure maximum public exposure. James was still reeling from the email I sent, barely speaking to his own lawyer. The lawsuit was officially withdrawn, but I arranged for a brief press conference immediately following the judge's formal dismissal. This was the moment I cemented the finality of his humiliation. I stood at the microphone, flanked by Rebecca, her expression stern and professional. A small crowd of reporters and local business associates, people who had witnessed Eleanor's public apology, had gathered hungry for the final act of this epic family drama. "The civil lawsuit filed against me by James Thorne has been withdrawn," I announced, my voice amplified and calm. As promised to my mother, Eleanor, I will not pursue criminal charges that could result in jail time for my brother for his corporate malfeasance. That was the moral settlement for the public apology she bravely delivered. I then paused, allowing the silence to draw out the tension. James, standing behind his lawyer 20 feet away, looked like a hunted animal. However, I continued, the moral debt of the Thorne family is now settled, but the personal debt of James Thorne is not. I stand here today to expose the full extent of his betrayal. I presented the facts not as conjecture, but as proven hidden truth. I spoke about the trust fund fraud, the unauthorized loan transfers, and then the final devastating detail provided by Chloe. James Thorne didn't just steal from his family, he created a secret life funded by fraud. He took $150,000 from an unsuspecting woman, Chloe, promising to build a new life with her while simultaneously defrauding his father's company. This money was not used for investment. It was used to cover up his corporate failure, essentially skimming an investor's payment to pay for his personal affair and lifestyle. The full extent of James's family debt is now proven to be built on lies, not just poor business decisions. James finally snapped. "She's lying. This is revenge. She's doing this for revenge," he screamed, lunging forward only to be restrained by his lawyer and a security guard. I ignored his outburst, the public nature of the confrontation being the final crushing blow. I used Ascendant Global's resources to ensure Ms. Chloe's money has been repaid, proving James's personal liability. Today, James Thorne loses everything he valued: his reputation, his credibility, and the respect of every associate in this city. I looked directly into the nearest camera, sending a message that would be seen by my father, Robert. He has chosen to live a life defined by manipulation. I chose to clean up his mess and reclaim my dignity. The tables turned when I stopped being the victim he wanted me to be, and became the CEO he feared I would become. With a final nod to Rebecca, I ended the press conference. I didn't wait to see James's reaction. The karma was complete. He was safe from jail, a promise made to my mother, but he was exposed to a far worse fate: public and professional ruin, the complete annihilation of his entire family drama facade. I walked away from his courthouse steps, shedding the weight of the Thorne name with every step. I was finally free. The hollow space in my chest was gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce sense of peace I hadn't known I was missing. The world didn't pause for the Thorne family's collapse. Months had passed since I walked away from the courthouse steps, leaving James shuddering in his lawyer's grip and the press swarming with the full story of his betrayal. Ascendant Global was thriving. We had successfully spun off Thorne Innovations into a smaller, more profitable entity, selling off the debt-ridden ventures and stabilizing the core tech. I was the architect of a spectacular corporate success story, lauded in business magazines for my ruthlessness and surgical precision. But professional success only settles the score. It doesn't quiet the soul. I had been back in Tokyo for a while, but the constant hum of the city felt too loud. I needed silence. I needed to stand on the ground where the fight truly began. So I took a long flight back to the States and drove out to the site of the old wooden house. The original cottage was gone, torn down in the frenzy of the initial ill-conceived sale. But the land, the property I had secured through the recovery of my trust fund inheritance, was mine again. I had commissioned a new architect, not James's firm, obviously, to build a simple, elegant, contemporary structure in its place. It was under construction now, but the foundation was laid, the skeletal frame standing tall against the blue Connecticut sky. It was a tangible symbol of being reborn, the new foundation of my life, built on solid ground, free from the rot of the toxic family dynamic. I stood there, overlooking the Delaware River, feeling the cold air against my face. I expected a final surge of anger or satisfaction, but there was only emptiness. The need for revenge had burned itself out. That's when my phone buzzed. It was a courier alert. A package had been delivered to my new address in Manhattan, forwarded from my old postbox. It was a small, worn box addressed in my mother Eleanor's elegant cursive. I drove back immediately. Part of me knew what it was: a final message from the woman I had forced to face the truth. Inside the box, there were only two things: The first was a worn velvet jewelry pouch containing my grandmother's gold locket, a piece I had long thought Eleanor had sold to cover some family debt years ago. The second was a thick, handwritten letter. I sat down and read. Eleanor's handwriting, once so theatrical and commanding, was small and shaky. My dearest Elizabeth, I know you won't want to hear from me, but you deserve to know the truth. Not the half-truths I read on that stage, but the whole thing. The public apology was necessary for James, but this letter is for my own soul. Your father and I have divorced. He is back in Connecticut, living a quiet life, still blaming me for the betrayal of his family business. He will never change. But I had to. The day I stood up and read that confession, I didn't just expose James. I exposed myself. I was a puppet of your father's manipulation, always prioritizing his dignity over my own self-respect. The reason I'm writing is James. You asked about him. He is alive, but everything is gone. The lawsuit cost him the last of his personal funds, and thanks to the evidence you provided, he was forced to declare bankruptcy. He's working in a regional accounting firm, entry level. He's paying off the debt he owes Chloe, the woman he wronged. He sends me letters full of bitterness and family drama. He still blames you. He still doesn't understand that his downfall was his own karma, it just wore your face. I sent you the locket because it was the one thing your father demanded I sell to cover James's first big loss, the one before the trust fund theft. I lied. I sold my engagement ring instead. I knew deep down that you were the only one who truly deserved an inheritance. Use that piece of jewelry to remember that even in the most toxic family you can find the strength to leave. You won my daughter. You are not a woman of revenge. You are a woman of transformation. Please find peace. I have finally begun to find mine. Eleanor. I finished the letter, placed it gently on the table, and opened the locket. Inside there was an old photo of my father and me taken before the family business consumed him. I clipped the locket around my neck. It felt heavy, not with guilt, but with history. My mother's letter confirmed the final lesson: the tables turned, not when I signed the takeover papers, but when I forced them to face the truth. James was paying his debt, both financial and moral, and my mother was finally building her own life free from her husband's shadow. The cycle of toxic family manipulation had been broken. I realized then that my work was truly done. I had reclaimed my assets, rebuilt my life, and restored my dignity. The girl who was excluded and dismissed by her brother's arrogance was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her value, who had fought the system, and who had won. I was free. I was reborn. For the first time, peace didn't feel like silence. It felt like beginning again. I called the site foreman at the cottage location. Start installing the windows. I'm moving in next month. I wasn't going to live in fear of my past. I was going to live on the foundation I built for myself. If this story of calculated confrontation and ultimate triumph resonated with you, I want to hear your voice. We all have a moment when we stand up to betrayal and reclaim our self-respect. What was the toxic family moment that forced your transformation? Drop your story in the comments below. Let's celebrate the moments when the tables turned. And if you want to make sure you never miss another story of karma and dignity, please remember to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for walking